call the roll, and Janice, you can let us know whether we have a quorum. We don't have that I see. I don't think we have anything we really have to vote on per se. We can certainly discuss it, but I don't think we have anything necessarily to vote on. So let me go ahead and call the January 22nd meeting of the Community Transportation Advisory Committee to order. First thing I'd like to do is introduce a new person. Yes, I heard somebody trying to come in. Anyhow, I'd like to introduce Don Root, who has the, hey Don. Don is joining our group as the Ashland alternate. And we welcome Don. He was in government position in sunny California for a number of years, is very much a train enthusiast, and I think that might be of interest to somebody on our committee, like Michael Testerman, and lives right on the railroad tracks here in downtown Ashland, and thoroughly enjoys it. He's an IT guy and helps out the town when we have meetings, and he's in control of our IT and video and all that jazz. So welcome to the group, Don. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we can go ahead and assume that we can either visualize or we can look at the American flag around us someplace. So let's go ahead and pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Janice, would you call the roll, please, ma'am?
Absolutely. Town of Ashland, Chair Martin.
Here.
Chesterfield County, Miss Beals. Ms. Jordan, Mr. Richwine, Richland County, Mr. Basham, Hanover County, Mr. Rasnick, Henrico County, Ms. Lancaster.
Here.
New Kent County, Vice Chair Guthrie.
Here.
Mr. Moyer. Powhatan County, Mr. Powers.
Here.
City of Richmond, Ms. Erickson, Mr. Hill, Chamber RVA, Mr. Easter, Mr. Mayman, NAACP, Mr. Minor, Mr. Johnson,
Present.
League of Women Voters, Ms. Weisiger, Ms. Rosenblum. Ms. Rosenblum is attending. I have not been able to move her over to panelist, but she is present. RABA, Mr. Burnley.
Here.
Virginia Association of Railway Patrons, Mr. Testerman.
Here.
Virginia Conservation Network, Mr. Gordon. Mr. Fisher. And VCU, Mr. Leonard.
Present.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call, and we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Mr. Powers, I acknowledge your raised hand.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to take a second to thank Janice for the reminders that she sends out prior to these meetings. It's very helpful for those of us like myself who are forgetful. And so I just want to let you know that I genuinely appreciate the reminders.
Fantastic. You're very welcome.
We thank Janice for that, as well as a lot of other things that she does behind the scenes to make these things happen. Thank you, Janice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have a quorum, so let's move on to administration. Are there any amendments or changes to our agenda today? Seeing none, I will move on to approval of the November 18th, 2021 Seatac meeting minutes. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
I guess, can we just take that as an acclamation? Whoever's, is that correct, Ken? Do we need a
We can do
roll
a voice
call?
vote.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion is passed. Chair now opens the meeting up for open public comment. Do we have any public non-members, speakers, et cetera, out there, Janice, for public comment?
She's muted.
No, sir, it doesn't appear like we have anybody in addition. If
Okay.
at some point there are members of the public that joined during the meeting, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen
Right.
where questions can be posed to the group.
Okay, great.
Looks like
Thank you.
everybody on board is either a member or an alternate.
Okay, somebody let me know if we have anything in the chat box, I guess is what it's referred to. Thank you. Okay, the next thing is the Seatac Chairman's report. The only thing I have to report on is the fact that I attended the January 4th meeting of the RRTPO, which was a lively meeting, well attended on a hybrid basis. A lot of discussion about how the meetings were to take place in response to COVID and the new upsurge. And to some extent, I guess, Chet and Ken, that led to us to go back to virtual. There was also a couple of presentations and a little conversation about the December Transportation Forum. Good, bad, and different, and the chairman asked for input in regards to future transportation forums. So that's my allotted 5 minutes. Chet, turning it on over to you in regards to our TPO updates, please, sir.
Thank you very much. I don't want to take too much of the time off the agenda. I wanted to point you towards the links in the agenda packet, summaries of the December and January TAC and policy board meetings. There was an endorsement for a Safe Routes to School TA grant application on behalf of the City of Richmond Public Schools. I believe that this coming month, the TPO is considering endorsement of the entire slate of TA grants. There's another funding request that was considered for the City of Richmond dealing with the Commerce Road Improvement Project. So there's details in the report on that request as well. Both were approved. As the chair mentioned, there was discussion about the Transportation Forum and what members would like to see moving forward to make it a success or to bring about changes if any were desired. So we expect to continue that discussion. There was actually a subcommittee formed that is going to be chaired by Dr. Newell from the city, and including Kevin Carroll from Chesterfield, Patricia Page from New Kent, and Canova Peterson from Hanover counties. We are working to set up the first meeting of that subcommittee now. Also wanted to point you towards the current work efforts update. A lot of the work that's going on right now is either in support of our bicycle pedestrian plan update. There's a lot of push right now to get that prepared for a public review period starting in February. So staff is actively working to get that ready. And then we're doing a lot of support at the staff level right now for the Cbta and making sure that their advisory committees are supplied with the best available information and decision makers can move forward with funding. And the biggest thing that people are talking about right now is regional funds that are available for allocation through the years FY23 to 26. There is a process underway to score and rank those applications, and The CBTA wants to make those recommendations sometime this spring, kind of the March, April window, so that smart scale grants can reflect those commitments. If you remember, the whole impetus for the CBTA was that the region would be able to better leverage available transportation dollars to get more bang for the buck and be able to compete on a more level playing field with Hampton Roads in Northern Virginia. So that's the update from the staff report and the staff perspective. And I guess it's the CBTA update as well. I'm going to turn 5D back to Ken to provide an update there, and it may be further on the agenda as well.
Thank you, Chet. I think we are continuing to hear from the localities about filling some of their vacancies. We are getting inquiries. So there are some responses coming in. So I think the letters that we generated have produced some results, albeit kind of a slow process. I think it is yielding, some positive results. So we'll follow up with some of those that we haven't heard from. Janice has some personal contacts with some of the local clerks to the boards of supervisors and whatnot, and we're using that connection to help us kind of spur on some action. So stay tuned. This is not it's an ongoing process.
Thank you. Anything else, Chet? Oh, okay. We now move on to new business. We have a presentation by Randy Selleck on our state rail plan. Looking forward to hearing from you, Randy, in regards to that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and thanks everybody for having me and for joining virtually on such a miserable weather day. But I'm glad to see that everybody seems to be, for the most part, at home, and that's good. I am Randy Selleck, Director of Rail Planning and Environmental at DRPT. I did spend some time with the MPO. It's been a number of years now, but it's always nice to come back and talk with you all and see some familiar faces. So I am just going to launch into the presentation here. Next slide, please. So the first thing that I wanted to sort of relay, off the bat is that there's some big organizational changes that have happened with DRPT and specifically the formation of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, VPRA. With the formation of the authority, a large portion of the passenger rail planning responsibilities have passed to VPRA. This is something that's kind of still underway, as everybody seems to be having in the region and across the country. It's been tough to fill positions, and so VPRA is in the process of staffing up. But because of the number of employees that left the DRPT rail section and went to VPRA, DRPT also is awfully shorthanded at this point. So DRPT and VPRA continue to help each other on the efforts that were underway prior to the separation, and I think that'll continue for a while. And Kate Youngbluth of VPRA is going to be on after me, and she can go more into kind of what VPRA, what they're doing and the efforts that they're moving forward, a lot of which DRPT, of course, started the work some time ago. Next slide, please. So the rail plan overview, I should mention before I launch into this, VPRA is taking the corridor planning and site-specific planning and project implementation part of the passenger rail planning function as we move forward. DRPT will still be responsible for statewide plans, coordination with VTrans, smart scale, things of that sort. And the line is a little bit blurry at this point, and I think it will continue to get clearer as going into the state rail plan overview, it really dovetails into VTrans, the larger state multimodal plan. Our last plan was adopted in 2018, so 2022 we are on a 4-year update cycle. The federal FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration, requires a 4-year update cycle. And really to apply to federal grants, among other requirements, it's typically one of those requirements to have the projects in that plan, similar to the MPO's long-range transportation plan. It includes 4 and 20-year horizons, so near term and farther out. And then, it gives us an opportunity to go from plan to plan and compare where we've been, where we're going, and how things performed and how projects performed. And of course, this plan, being the first one with VPRA established, will be working very closely with them, certainly on all aspects of the plan, the passenger rail related portions. Next slide, please. The statewide rail plan, again, is sort of dovetails up into VTrans, VTrans being the larger statewide multimodal plan. And it serves as a sort of an implementation plan for the rail projects and addresses those midterm and long-term VTrans needs. Next slide, please. Going now into the plan development process. We had some initial scoping and public outreach in May of 2021. So May of last year, we had one larger public meeting. We had a number of individual stakeholder meetings with different groups of stakeholders. We also had individual meetings with organizations. So upon request, we would go and meet with with groups to talk about the plan and solicit input on the plan. We've compiled our draft projects list. We'll continue to work on that, and we work with the stakeholders and the railroads to validate that list. And that's sort of where we are now in the process. We are running a little bit behind. Again, it's really the staffing issues that have impacted things. But we are continuing forward, just a little bit of a delay in our original goal of getting the plan completed earlier this year, but it'll be probably later this year. We also will include a service development plan as part of the state rail plan, which I'll go into. That'll be a major effort in the plan. And then, of course, looking at plan policies, which I'll also talk more about. And then with the plan final adoption, we're shooting toward mid-2022 for that adoption of the plan. Next slide, please. This is just an overview of the plan structure. Really, the top 3 bars are sort of data collection and where we are now, and comparisons to where we had been in the past, and with past plans. Looking at current and future trends in both the passenger and the freight rail sectors, coming up with those goals and objectives, and then, of course, the policies, the service gap analysis, which really is the service development plan that I spoke about, and then the list of projects, and then making sure that the list of projects ultimately does provide benefits, to the Commonwealth, and circling back to make sure that that's reflected in that it does achieve the goals and objectives of the plan. Next slide, please. So we have a number of policies to update, and this is really our first plan with VPRA at the being fully up and running. And so the state rail plan and DRPT our goal really is to set up these policies at a fairly high level for the most part, And then in certain policies, particularly passenger rail policies, for example, those will be things that will important for VPRA to coordinate with and to fill in, and definitely to add their more specific policies to the overarching policies. And some of these have been in previous plans to some degree, but other ones are newer and certainly are gaining more importance. Things like equity policy, climate change policy, for example. So these are all things that the CTB will and the VPRA board will need to weigh in on as we move forward to help further develop these plan policies. Next slide, please. And this just gives an idea of the policy development. We start with sort of existing policies. We look at the policies that we might need to add to that list. We look at sort of best practices and things that are happening in other states, in industry, to help guide the formation of those new policies. And then ultimately those policies will help to guide our future decisions in the Commonwealth when it comes to all things rail. Next slide, please. And this plan also is the first plan that's being done with the massive changes that have happened in the last couple of years in the state. Right now, the Transforming Rail in Virginia program is underway through negotiations with CSX. Quite a bit of rail corridor in the state is being purchased for use with passenger service. And ultimately, particularly on the Rfmp, the goal is to have some level of separation between passenger rail and freight rail, which will greatly enhance passenger rail service and will allow for the expansion that is part of that initiative. Also working on initiatives with Norfolk Southern out to the west of the state that will bring some big changes to passenger rail service. And so this current plan has to take that all into account, and again underscores the importance of working with VPRA. So next steps for our policies, as I said, they're currently under development. The goal is to have policies that we can apply statewide that fit with VPRA's goals as well, and for freight and passenger, and then other multimodal issues. We, of course, with passenger rail service, you have bus service that also goes with that, and we want to make sure that all the modes work together. That's really the goal ultimately for service in the state. And then, as I said before, VPRA and other agencies can build upon those policies with portions that are more specific to their particular activities by adding more specific. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, statewide service plan is a big portion of this new plan update. And really, when I say service plan, we're looking out beyond. We have Transforming Rail in Virginia, which is has its own levels of service, its multiple phases, and Kate may be able to talk more about that. And then you have what was envisioned with the DC to RPA study, which is sort of another level of service on top of and complementing Transforming Rail. And then you have out beyond that, 2040, 2050 plus. That's one of the things that we want to focus on with this service plan, is that farther out vision for service in and also, of course, incorporating those policies that we developed through the process, and really focusing on equity and making sure that where service is needed and where service can be provided, that we do provide, and that all the citizens of the Commonwealth are able to access good, reliable rail service, while still supporting, of course, freight rail service, which is so important to the economy of the state. So that needs to be balanced as well. Next slide, please. So for this rail plan, we're also taking a little bit different approach. We are creating an executive summary document that will be a standalone, text, paper-based if people want to print it out. But we are, as the main sort of interactive form of the rail plan, we are doing an Arcgis Story Map. This is just a screenshot. It's still under development, but it will allow people to go online to very easily browse through the plan, look at the different parts of the plan, look at maps, and lots of interactive content to make it a little bit easier for individuals to who are not intimately familiar with transportation or rail to look through the plan and understand the plan. Next slide, please. In that story map, we're going to have some, as I said, interactive content, things like this passenger rail dashboard. This uses data available from Amtrak and all available and VRE to look at passenger rail on-time performance in the state. And you can look at individual routes overall, look at different years. So this will be a way of sort of presenting data in an interactive way for the public to look at in the rail plan. Next slide, please. On the freight side, we'll have interactive maps such as this one. This is showing the amount of rail served industry or potential rail served industries in particular areas. So the yellow are areas that have very good access for industries to rail service. And red and the blue, there's less. And the idea behind this is just to give you an idea of what's available. Should an industry decide to utilize rail, how probable or likely or easily could that be done? And then also for industry, places that where would you locate if you did have goods that were best shipped by rail, where could you do that? And then on the right hand side, some metrics and facts there that give you a numerical version of what you see on the map. Next slide, please. So for our next steps in our rail plan, as I mentioned before, we're doing project list vetting and refining that project list. We're working on our rail plan policies. We will be starting work on the service development plan with VPRA and other stakeholders. We do plan to have further public engagement. I would expect in the spring we'll reach back out again to stakeholders and to the public to present the information that we've developed so far in the plan and talk about more about the policies, more about the service development plan to get feedback from stakeholders and the public before we do the plan. I intentionally did not add a link to the current. We have a website for the state rail plan that goes off of the DRPT website. Because of some technical issues, the DRPT website had been down for, close to a month. Real issues. And so I didn't add a link because I didn't want something that would take people to a dead site. And of course, within the last day, I think the site's finally up and functioning. So if you go to the DRPT website, go to rail planning, there is a link which will take you to a site that gives you some information and some updates on the rail plan and sort of where we are and what we are going to continue with. And we'll post regular updates to that site as far as public involvement as well. So, opportunities to comment, etc. And that is the end of my presentation. There's my name and email address. And I will be happy to answer any questions I can. And if I can't get you an answer right now, I'll be happy to follow up with one as well.
Thank you, Randy. I think Ken sent out on chat a couple of questions. Do you see those?
Let me open the chat here. Okay. Yes, I do see. So the question is the state rail plan financially constrained, and does it have a multimodal component? The state rail plan, it's not financially constrained in the sense of the MPO's long range plan. You know, there isn't that requirement, you know, that FHWA has, that the rail plan have that fiscal constraint. With that being said, certainly, well, and part of that has to do with funding, although our funding is becoming a little bit more reliable and regular on the rail side. In the past, it's been fairly, I won't say easy, because I've worked at the MPO and understand what it's like to try to get cost estimates and projections out of VDOT and others. But the funding on the rail side has a lot of times been grant funded and grant programs. And so it really depends on, you know, you go out for a grant. If you get the grant and you get the federal money and you have a match, you can build the infrastructure. And as I said, that's becoming a little bit less the case. We now have the Commonwealth Rail Fund, which is dedicated funding. The vast majority of that goes to VPRA for passenger rail and infrastructure, and a small percentage to RPT, freight rail side, freight rail grant programs. But yeah, so long way around, no, it's not. Does it have a multimodal component? It does, I guess, in so much as I said before, there are bus connections on the rail side. There is access to station, you know, and issues, and you know, looking at that particular aspect. Certainly, you know, the rail service operates in concert with the roads and in Virginia and the highway system, and that can't be ignored. And also, but as a multimodal plan, it's not multimodal in the sense of something like VTrans, where you really have equal representation of all the different modes and how those all kind of work together. It certainly is focused on rail, but where the rail network connects to the other modes, certainly it's represented in that form. I hope that makes some sense.
Thank you, Randy. I think Champ Burnley has a couple of questions. Champ?
I do. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Randy, good to see you again. Certainly seen you at Seatac many times over the years. Really,
yes,
a comment and two questions for you. A lot of people don't realize, but when it comes to the multimodalism, something we're very proud of, and Virginia had a big part to do with this, is 10 years ago, if you wanted to go somewhere and take your bike for vacation or use it for first mile, last mile, you couldn't put it on an Amtrak train. And now, again, due to a lot of efforts here in Virginia, you can put your bike on essentially any train in the United States with the exception of Excella. So we've seen a big shift. And the numbers I saw prior to COVID, over 50,000 people a year were doing that. So it's a great example of how multimodalism can work. But that said, my questions are, I haven't seen anything regarding with the purchase now of the rail lines. We're spending what, $4 or $5 billion. And I know on the high speed rail, we talked about a Greenway parallel to that corridor so we could get the highest and best use of our tax dollars for that. With the first question, with the new purchases, what's being done to look at the potentials to do that? And that said, for example, to be able to ride, you know, to a train station and park my bike and get on the train, if I could do it safely, I think I and a lot of people would do that. What measures are being taken by DRPT for, say, secure bike parking like we see up at Wheelie Avenue up in Reston, where I can ride my bike, I can safely secure it and know that when I get back 3, 4, 5 days later, it hadn't been stolen, it hadn't been sitting down in the rain, but I can have a true multimodal connection, whether it's in a car, in an Uber, in a taxi, on a bike, or walking, or with transit.
Good questions, Champ.
Thanks.
Yes, yeah. Well, I guess I'll do the first last. Or the last first. Bicycles at stations. So I think that's something that's going to fall under the station plan. And this is something again that'll be important, as we coordinate with VPRA. We have an effort underway now because we just from a basic level, all the stations that Virginia is taking ownership of which it's not all of them, but there's a subset that Virginia now will be responsible for. There's ADA compliance is a problem. And so that's going to be addressed right off the bat, of course. But I think as we move forward and develop the station policies, that's something that can be part of the station policy where it's, just basic multimodal connections, things like the ability to store bicycles, things like making sure the stations have sidewalks, that connect to the stations, making sure that there's easy access by buses and other transit to the stations. So that I think that's where what you're asking about with the stations comes in. As far as the greenways, that gets more complicated. And Kate may be able to speak to this a little bit, but depending on what part of the network the acquisition is occurring on, at face value, you say, okay, well, we're purchasing all this rail right away. And so we're going to be able to just go in there and do what we'd like to do with that right away and, put a trail in next to it if that's something that the Commonwealth decides it wants to do. There are still lease agreements with the railroads that run on the freight railroads that run on most of those corridors. I don't know the vision for the future as, like, for example, the Rfmp, where you're actually going to have separation of passenger rate. If there's the potential to do something like that on the portion of the right-of-way that's going to be dedicated to passenger rail. Certainly on freight rail right-of-way or right-of-way that's basically runs freight, you're going to have that limitation of the freight railroad has its requirements just like it always has. It has its potential issues with rails with trail type of situations. And then of course the availability and the width of the right-of-way. Some of those areas, the right-of-way is already constrained by what's going to be built, what's planned to be built. From a rail infrastructure perspective, there may be places, other parts of the network that you have sufficient right-of-way to consider something like that. So dancing around your question, it's really going to depend on the freight rail activity on that piece of the network. It's going to depend on the right-of-way that's available. And then it's also, I think, going to depend some on, what connections do you have enough right away and enough length to make a connection, that makes sense. You certainly don't want to just have a couple miles of trail somewhere that don't connect. But I think there's going to be opportunities, but it's going to depend heavily on sort of those factors.
Thanks.
Thank you, Randy, very much. We do appreciate your coming forward and updating us in regards to passenger rail. And it's something very close to my heart, and I'm sure Don Root's heart here in downtown Ashland. We'll look forward to hearing back from you in the future, and take care. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I'll be happy to come back when throughout the process. So.
Great. Take care. Happy New Year to you. Our next presenter is Catherine Youngbluth, Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. Thank you. Catherine?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm here. I'm Catherine Youngbluth. I'm the Director of Planning at the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, and I'm pleased to walk through a presentation about the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, give you a little bit of background, and then I'll take you through how the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority is being formed currently and through legislation. And then finally, I will take you through the projects. We'll talk about the agreements and the projects that resulted of that, just at a very high level. And feel free, I guess at the end, we'll take questions, but happy to take those. So next slide. So these will be slides you probably have seen in the past, but just to remind you, Virginia is really the epicenter of rail on the East Coast. If we want to go anywhere else in the nation, and you live in Boston, or if you live in, Savannah or Point South, you're really going to come through Virginia eventually if you ride the rail the whole way. So this slide really depicts the mix of passenger and freight rail lines throughout the state and on the East Coast into the Midwest. So it's a good illustration of how busy our railroad network in Virginia, how busy they are. We've got a couple dots on there. They're very small, but those are the ports in Virginia. And so those are very essential to keep freight and rail connected to those in a streamlined fashion. Next slide. This is a slide that focuses on the passenger rail network in Virginia. So this is where the passenger, both VRE and Amtrak, either state supported or long distance run. And so the lines are really indicated by the colors underneath. We do have some throughway bus services, so that's represented in the dashed line. So we're trying to make connections where connections can be made with mass transit and passenger rail. And I'll talk a little bit about this expansion of this network in a couple of slides. Next slide. So Virginia has really been committed to rail throughout since the 80s. And many of you may have experienced that in the past through your good work in the regional work. So I'm not going to read, I'm not a person that reads every slide, every point on the slide, but you can get the sense of the investments and the way that Virginia has committed itself to rail in the past. So the timeline really gives you a sense of not only the freight investments and funding that we've tried to support through creation of things like the 1987 Industrial Rail Access Fund, but everything till today is that we're trying to invest in separation of passenger and rail projects to better streamline both operators for both passenger and freight with the formation of the Commonwealth Rail Fund, which Randy just talked about in brief. Next slide. This is another timeline that shows sort of the history of how we've, since 2006, how we've worked through investing in service. So, and passenger service specifically. So we started with a dedicated fund. We were able to start some state-supported service in 2009, and that service became to duplicate and triplicate throughout the last 20 years. So it's been a very good success story with Amtrak service and the popularity of that service as we've begun to introduce new passenger rail service to the state. Next slide. So this slide is really to illustrate what our constraints are. And it's really a multimodal look of how Virginia over the past decade or longer have tried to solve the problem of the congestion on our highway networks and the increasing demand of both travel demand of both the highway networks, the rail network, and the Port of Virginia. How do we get both people and freight around the state in a better way? And so many of you probably have been following over time, the state embarked on a study of the I-95 corridor. And what they found is that if they invested $100 billion into the 95 corridor, added an additional lane, the next day it would be just as congested as it was before the lane was constructed. So to solve that problem, it's not 100 billion, excuse me, it's 12 billion, as the slide indicates. So we also looked at the rail network, and we found that the biggest bottleneck was actually between Virginia and the District of Columbia at a location called Long Bridge. It was at 98% capacity during peak hours, and it wasn't going anywhere. The bridge has been there for 1904. It's 2 tracks, and we really needed to take a hard look with the District of Columbia of how to advance that project to expand capacity for all the good of all travelers. The Port of Virginia, of course, was also getting a higher demand, and we wanted to be able to meet that without increasing the capacity on our roadway, which based on the study, we knew would not work. So we saw that the best opportunity is really to expand rail. So the next slide, please. So we started looking at CSX and Norfolk Southern, trying to see how we could increase passenger rail service to help free up some of the roadway congestion due to passengers, but then also to work with those operators on the demand that their freight networks were experiencing, both now and in the future. So the first set of railroad agreements that came through, and you all likely heard about, was in 2019, where the governor of Virginia announced an agreement with CSX, Amtrak, and VRE to invest in capacity expansion throughout the CSX railways in Virginia. It was you'll see on the map on the right, it sort of outlines in colors where the agreements are, the partnerships. And in 2021, or back in March of last year, those agreements were finalized, and Virginia began to acquire half of the railroad right-of-way for CSX in Virginia. So it was very exciting. Secretary Pete was at our announcement, and we continued to begin capital projects that would help expand service. Another major announcement happened earlier in 2021 in May, and that was another governor announcement regarding increasing a purchase and increase in service along the Norfolk Southern line, specifically in the New River Valley area. Norfolk Southern on this map is indicated in the light blue color. So we're very excited on those opportunities to both expand and increase passenger rail throughout the state. I'll talk more about the projects and the service that will come with these agreements in a few slides. Next slide. So what's the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority? So the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, in response to the agreement side we just saw, the General Assembly wanted a way to control the future of the railroad right-of-way that Virginia was purchasing. We're purchasing both railroad right-of-way and track within the CSX corridors, and we wanted a way to ensure that it could be secured for the future. It also could have certain rights, eminent domain, direct recipient of U.S. grants, and the ability to be a building arm of the state, unlike what DRPT had been in the past, which is primarily a funding and policymaking organization. This was really a capital projects building, and then a way to also operate the service that the agreements committed us to. So we have the ability to both partner with other commuter and passenger rail services operators, and we'll own all the right-of-way assets owned by the state. We also have VPRA has a 15-member board. The chair of the DRPT is the chair of the board is the DRPT director. So the relationship is solidified, but there are rotating members of that 15-member board. Next slide. This is what the organization looks like generally, and that's evolving over time. I work on the left side of the screen, and actually I was able to have a few more employees added underneath me in a more recent chart. But I work under the Chief Operating Officer. One of the There's a slide for the engineering branch, and it's actually an additional slide, and that, which I did not include in this presentation, but it's generally about 45, 50 people to manage the projects that I'll talk to you about in a second. Both the engineering and the construction arm basically resides under the chief operating officer and the director of rail services. So the folks that work with the operators regarding implementation, current continuity of service for passenger rail and the operation and maintenance of things like stations. That resides under the director of rail services. We have a CFO and external affairs and a CAO, of course. And we all report to the executive director, and he reports to the board. So this is sort of how we're set up in a general fashion. We're hiring folks, as Randy had mentioned earlier, currently. So if you know anyone, send them our way. Next slide. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the rail projects and service. Next slide. So there's two major agreements that we're really viewing the projects and service based on. The first I'll talk to you about is the Csx agreement. So the Csx agreement, if you look at the lower left map, it's called network map, there's a number of colors. Those colors represent what the purchase, half of the what Virginia purchased half of the railroad right-of-way, those locations, those physical locations. So you'll see, if you think back to the map we saw at the beginning of just the passenger rail service, one of the key connections that we don't have to now, which we purchased as part of this right-of-way acquisition, was segment 3, which is the dark blue, and it actually is the east-west connection from Doswell to Clifton Forge. That will be a game changer in it's a distant future project, but it will be a game changer for rail, moving on rail throughout the state. The Rfmp Corridor, the subject of the DC to RBA work that Randy and Emily did for so many good years, so much good work there, is in the light blue and is also on the right side of the screen. So that is what's known as the Rfmp Corridor, running from essentially Washington, DC down to Richmond. We do also own or are purchasing what's known as the S line, which is an orange, and that runs from about Petersburg down into North Carolina. So the interesting part of this deal is that we actually own into North Carolina and into the District of Columbia. The stop ends in the District of Columbia around where the capital is. So it's a place called CP, Virginia. The information on the right really shows you the program of projects that we intend to do in what's known as phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is a series of projects that will expand the corridor by 2026. Phase 2 projects will conclude in 2030. So those are the ones that will really, they will link rail expansion with passenger rail service expansion. So I'll talk about that in a second, but that's generally the overview of what we've purchased, where we're purchasing it, and what projects we're moving forward. Next slide. So one of the critical areas for us, just as a rail entity, reflecting back on the rail Virginia being the epicenter of rail in the East Coast, is Long Bridge. Long Bridge is really the constraining spot, as I had mentioned earlier, with the 2-track bridge. So on the left side, you'll see a series of projects that are in and around Long Bridge. And then on the right side, you'll see the Long Bridge image. There are 3 projects really in the Long Bridge corridor. It's Long Bridge itself, which is in the, if you're looking at the left side of the screen, the orange line over the river. And then there's north of the Long Bridge at what's labeled LE is a project we call L'Enfant 4th Track. It's actually 4th track and station improvements. And south of the orange line is a project called Alexandria 4th Track. And you'll see there that our goal is to get the existing network from either 2 or 3 tracks to 4. That will be a game changer for capacity and reliability of these new operations that will introduce when those projects come online. So you'll see the phasing and recognize that the Alexandria 4th track is a phase 1 project, as I mentioned. It'll be delivered in 2026, as well as the Lafont. Longbridge is a longer term project, will be delivered by 2030. Next slide. So just a quick overview of Longbridge. This is generally the timeline that Longbridge has taken is on the upper part of the screen. So you can see that we're in the preliminary engineering phase, and we'll be in that till 2023. We had concluded the EIS work in 2020. So our NEPA obligations are concluded, and we're now implementing the mitigations as a part of that. We'll go into final design and then construction, as you can see in the timeline in those years. It's a complex project. There are 27 stakeholders here, and many of them are federal stakeholders. So we've got the majority of the project is also within National Park Service land. So when you look at this map and you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, and even 5, those are all within National Parks property. So of the corridor that is about 2 miles long, 90% of it is within National Parks property, or in a federal water, being the Potomac River and the Washington Channel. We've got a number of bridges. Those are the ones that are labeled in a number, and then labeled in the folk stairs below. And I always say, if we're not building a bridge, we're building a retaining wall. It's a very complex corridor going into a dense part of the city, over major highways, I-395 and Main Avenue being very popular throughways for folks traveling from Virginia to the District of Columbia. Next slide. So, like I said before, the new service will correspond with construction. So you'll see here, I'm not going to read all of these, but essentially what we're doing is we're increasing both VRE passenger service and Amtrak passenger service as part of these phased improvements. They increase significantly, and the amount of availability for these trains becomes much different than it is today. The VRE, and I'll go into this more in a second, but the VRE service will offer midday service and evening service, as well as additional peak hour service to better meet the demand of the users of the VRE train network. For state-supported service, we will double that for Amtrak. So it will go from 6 to 12. And that'll be great if you want to get around regionally in the state. And then in the future, we also have a can opener for the opportunity to go to Roanoke. But those negotiations haven't been finalized. So we're really trying to make it easier for all folks traveling in Virginia to go by rail. Next slide. These are details of how we're increasing this one focused passenger rail service. So this one focuses on Amtrak. And so the way to read this slide is if you look on the right side of the screen, it shows in dotted like turquoise by year, the number of trains and the routing of those trains when they would increase based on the delivery of projects. So at this outset of the execution of the agreement, we were able to increase passenger rail and Amtrak service, and we did that over the summer. You may have seen that we announced a new stop in Richmond, and that was a part of this Transforming Rail in Virginia deal. So it's really, these are the 12 Amtrak trains I had mentioned before, round trip service for each of one of these. So the slide on the text on the right really just goes over what we'll do with the service and the other factors we're considering as part of our work. So we have a specific agreement with Amtrak, and we're looking at these factors as we move forward. So equipment is very important, other availability, how we do the scheduling, and where the routing goes. Next slide. So VRE is also obviously very important to us as a commuter. I know that's north of the likely the most of the region here that we're talking to, but we will increase in service for VRE in the ways I mentioned before. So midday service will be available, as will evening service and additional trains during peak hour. So you'll look on this slide and take a look at that right side of the map of the diagram, and notice that there will increase service on both the Manassas line and on the VRE Fredericksburg line to better serve the patrons that use those commuter rail services. Next slide. So Norfolk Southern, that there was a brief bullet on the last slide saying that we worked out some agreements with Norfolk Southern on the VRE service. But this most recent announcement really focuses on Amtrak service throughout the state. So you'll see on the bottom left the routing of the Norfolk Southern line in orange. At the very bottom is a little dashed line to New River, from Roanoke to New River Valley, which represents the area in which the deal that was announced in May in 2021. That was the focus of that those agreements. And what we did was we agreed to purchase there was a term sheet for an agreement to purchase what's known as the Virginia line, or V line, which connects Roanoke to the New River Valley. So Virginia Tech, Bradford universities, there's other major draws and attractions in the New River Valley. And over time, we evaluated with Randy and Emily and others at DRPT's good work about the possibility for having a station there. With that background, and when we expanded state-supported service to Roanoke, as you can see on the slide back in 2017, that routing overperformed. So the demand for folks from Roanoke to use the train overperformed what was estimated at the study level. You'll see at this the bullet on the slide that was a significant amount of increase that we hadn't expected, and we do expect that the New River Valley work will also attract just as many patrons, if not more, than we've studied and estimated. So the total purchase is really 28 miles from that Roanoke dash line to New River Valley. And we're very excited, and we've started work on the New River Valley passenger station feasibility study. I started that in the fall it's a pre-NEPA stage to doing a station, a NEPA, moving a preferred alternative, examining station possibilities, and then moving it forward to the NEPA stage. Next slide. So here's a little bit more, and I talked a lot about this already, but this is the New River Valley purchase area. It's a little closer map. You can see where the New River Valley proposed station is on the lower left. And again, that 28 miles I mentioned is in the yellow orange on the lower left as well. The net estimate is 80,000 new riders. And this will be the first time that New River Valley has had passenger service since 1979. It's a great, it will be a great asset for the region. And having worked on the feasibility study and started public outreach efforts, we've had great response to and interest from the folks from the region. There's a survey that's open regarding the station today, and we've had over 2,500 people respond to that survey. So people are very interested in the area. The agreement committed Virginia and Norfolk Southern and to doing improvements to that Virginia line. So the 200 million worth of capital improvements are really to the entire line, not just for the station. So it will be upgrading bridges, upgrading the line for safety, all the work that really needs to be done to accommodate this passenger rail and make it a safe and cohesive corridor will be contemplated in the terms of the agreement currently. Next slide. And that's it for my presentation. I'm happy to take questions or provide clarity on anything that I rushed through.
Champ, you've asked if these presentations can be, if we can get copies of these. My hopes are that they can be uploaded, downloaded, whatever, to our website. Is that possible, Ken? So that we can access those and make copies for ourselves. Is that possible, Ken?
Yes, I believe it is.
Okay. I think that'd be very, very helpful. Catherine, thank you very much. It's exciting. Any type of expansion of transportation in the state of Virginia is of great interest and exciting to all of us. And we thank you for your organization's efforts. Michael has a question on a chat question. Why is Virginia buying the former Virginia line? I didn't get the rest of it. To Southwest Virginia was more direct for passenger rail. Oh, the S&W was more. You're talking to the expert now, Catherine. Do you get the question?
Yes, I do. I get the essence of the question. When we were negotiating with the Norfolk Southern, it became very clear during those discussions that the Virginia line was the option that was on the table for purchase for passenger rail service. So given that opportunity, or not having new passenger rail service to New River Valley at all, the executives determined and talked it over with the secretary, and they determined that that was the best option to get passenger rail service into New River Valley in the future. It doesn't preclude running any future, passenger rail service to anywhere else. It just means that at this time, this is the location and focus of that agreement.
Answer your question, Michael?
As long as it doesn't preclude future routing over the more direct route straight to Radford, straight to Bristol, and eliminating the need for a tunnel to reach where the current line is to get to that southwestern route. Just bringing it up for thought. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Catherine, thank you very much for an update. We look forward to continued updates in the future.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Our next presentation is an update on the City of Richmond's pathway to equity. Ms. Moore Clark and Ms. Rowan.
Good afternoon, everyone. I
Hello.
am Diana Moore Clark with the Office of Equitable Transit and Mobility. And today we will be presenting on Path to Equity. This is our policy guide for Richmond Connects. We're very excited about this policy document as we envision it to be a blueprint for the nation in actually looking at equitable planning across cities across the US. So we're very excited about this, and we would love to share with you today on how we started and where we are as far as having our draft document available for review through January 31st. So we ask that even after today's presentation, you take the time to visit our website and review the document and provide any comments. I am introducing Kelly Rowan, who is our program manager for this effort, as well as our Richmond Connects, and she will be giving the presentations, and we both will take any questions that you may have at the end.
Awesome. Thank you, Diana. Can everybody see my slides? Give me a thumbs up. Good. All right. So like Diana said, I am the Transit Planning and Mobility Program Management Consultant for the City of Richmond Office of Equitable Transit and Mobility. I presented to you guys several months back when we were kind of in the midst of our outreach for this effort, and we were talking about our Tacos for Transportation events. And we, like Diana said, are at the draft review phase. So we've made some progress since we last chatted with you guys. So just For anybody that wasn't on that other conversation, we are a relatively new office formed in September of 2020. We're organized under Department of Public Works, and our office is the Office of Equitable Transit and Mobility. So the element that we have at draft review phase right now is this first piece, the Path to Equity, which is the policy guide for the upcoming Richmond Connects update. So the Richmond Connects plan hadn't been updated since 2013. As you guys know, the city's come out with a new master plan, and we've completed several large transportation projects. The BRT wasn't online when the old Richmond Connects plan was completed. We have added miles of bike lanes. The transportation landscape is just a lot different. So it's definitely ready for an update. So we envision this policy guide really laying the framework for the next stage of Richmond Connects, which will be the Equitable Mobility and Accessibility Action Plan. That will be the shorter range needs assessment. And then we plan to tier those needs and develop recommendations in the form of projects, programs, and strategies for the top needs. And that will really give us an opportunity to align with the mayor's equity agenda, align our needs assessment methodology with that. Then we envision for the long range element to do a scenario plan where we're asking the question, if we make investments, large scale investments in X, Y, or Z type of transportation, what would that do for connectivity and equitable accessibility across the city? So we're really at the first stage, but it's an important first stage. So we've been working on this policy guide since early spring. We then did our big outreach push over the summer. We did as much of it outdoors as we could to be conscious of COVID and social distancing. We had our advisory committee meet in September, and we've been working over the fall until now to draft the plan. So our stakeholder groups, we had an internal steering committee that met regularly throughout the process, helped scope the plan, helped scope the outreach, and really guided us along every step of the way. We also had an advisory committee, of which Plan RVA was represented on, as well as our other local, regional, and state planning partners. We had advocacy groups. We had some of our social justice groups represented, and we had a group of our ambassadors that were paid representatives from the city of Richmond to represent the various neighborhoods, sort of serving as our community advisory committee as well. And that group met once for this process, but then also continued to review the draft document through email and through our online portal. So the public generally was involved over the summer. We did 3 tacos for transportation events. We also sent a snow cone truck and some canvassers out to a national night out event and to the back to school jam that was at Whitcomb. We had a day where we did some bus stop intercept surveys. We had paper copies available at libraries and senior centers. And of course we did a large social media push. Let's see. We also had some media coverage. We had a couple of conversations with Community Clovia. We, of course, did our internal channels of our press release, which got picked up by a couple news stations. So we love the free press. The survey was live from June 25th to August 27th. We had 1,904 participants. 42 of those took our Spanish version, Spanish in Spanish language. 442 had not participated in any sort of Richmond planning or Richmond outreach before, so that's always great when we've reached some people that haven't been reached before. We tracked pretty well in terms of income of our participants. Our participants estimated to be average income estimated to be around $54,000 a year, and 47% of our respondents earn below $45,000 a year. And the city's median income is $47,250 in 2019. So we're fairly representative of our various income groups. We did skew a little bit towards middle-aged. We skewed a little bit more towards women, and white was overrepresented. 52% of our respondents were white compared to only 45% of the city. We did have 5% noted a Latino, Latina, Latinx ethnicity compared to 7.3%. So we were fairly in line with that representation. Lessons learned, the events that we did that were with coexisting events had way better turnout. I will caveat that when we were planning this, we were not even sure if we were going to be able to gather. There was still a COVID restriction on number of people that could be at a gathering. So when we were planning this, we were like, let's just do something outside, taco truck. A lot of these other events were on hold and hadn't been planned yet. But when we move forward with Richmond Connects, I think the in-person outreach will definitely try and synergize, if you will, with existing outreach. I'll say from our experience, social media is the best bang for your buck, but in our case, it produced a wider, more female identifying and more middle-aged respondent. So, if we need to reach people that haven't necessarily been reached before, it takes a little bit more effort than just throwing something up on Facebook. I'll also say some people want to take a survey on paper, no matter how snazzy the virtual one is. So that was definitely a lesson learned. I think we will prepare a slightly simpler version of our surveys going forward to have as a paper copy. This survey was awesome, but on paper it was kind of cumbersome. So I think we'll simplify for a paper copy going forward. And Kelly's personal lesson learned is to hire an intern who can input the paper copy responses for us, because that didn't anticipate the labor hours I would take to input those. So overall, we had a pretty good turnout. So what did we hear? The first main part of the survey asked Richmonders to look through a set of 10 past injustices related to transportation and land use planning that have resulted in inequities today, and ask them to say which of these were most impactful to their lives today and which do they think had the most impact overall. When we pulled out the top 5, you can see these listed on the screen. These you can see when we get into the policy guide itself, into that chapter, are reflected heavily in the new policy that was written. And that's in the form of equity factors. And those are desired outcomes related to transportation equity. And those new policy statements are going to be used in addition to the existing objectives and goals from the master plan. So I like to state that, these are in addition to, but we felt like we needed some additional language to better align the policy with the mayor's equity agenda. So neighborhood dissection was ranked number 1, and that we're talking about the destruction of Black and low income neighborhoods for the construction of freeways. So redlining popped up as number 2. I'm sure all of you are familiar with that, but that's the practice of the Homeowners Loan Corporation in the early 30s, where residential neighborhoods were given grades to reflect their mortgage security. They were color-coded on maps. Those that received the lowest letter of D were colored red and were considered hazardous. Importantly, part of the information that was used for grading the neighborhoods was quality of housing, recent history of sale and rent values, and crucially, the racial and ethnic identity and class of the residents. So that really served as a basis of the neighborhood's grade. So definitely a racial and class motivator behind those grades. And those that policy blocking mortgage investment in these areas has meant that the effects of that are still resonating in Richmond today. It's really obvious when you look at those maps, and you can see the lack of public investment in those areas as well. The third top, if you will, the third most impactful injustice, which is a little bit more complex, is the suburbanization of poverty. So we articulate in the plan, and I really encourage you to go and read that section of the plan to get a little bit more in depth in this. But this is really, we're talking about a cascade of housing and land use policies that made inner core housing not affordable, especially for families. And so they've been pushed into these older inner ring suburbs that are pretty car dependent. So that affordable housing is becoming less available in the urban parts. Some of the most vulnerable are pushed into these suburbs farther away from jobs and services. And they don't have access to comprehensive transit, bike, and pedestrian infrastructure like they would in a downtown area. The fourth most impactful injustice was urban renewal. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Federal funding given to cities to clear and demolish Black and low income neighborhoods, areas that they had deemed as blighted, and put up these massive limited use buildings or lower density housing. So, in Richmond, these projects targeted areas like Fulton, Randolph, and Jackson Ward. And we can still see how some of these communities are cut off from services, and cut off from services that are enjoyed by historically white neighborhoods of a similar age, like the Fan District. The fifth most impactful injustice is transportation planning itself. So we're really calling ourselves out on this one, right? I am a transportation planner. But just recognizing that in the last 50 or so years, the tools and the data that we have used have favored automobiles. We've used these tools and techniques that have prioritized high-speed automobile traffic over bicycling, pedestrian, and transit projects. And this focus on automobile speed, on reducing congestion, and increasing speed has put a priority on automobiles and has resulted in racial minorities and low-income people being more frequently killed by motorists, and also having less access to jobs and destinations without a car. So, like I said, that last one, calling ourselves out, recognizing that we have lots of good tools moving forward and the more recent past, but our plan is really articulating, the cascade of all the different policies that have been enacted over the last 50 to 100 years that have resulted in the system that we have today. So that was the first section of the survey, and like I said, you can read more about all of those in the policy guide that's available online. So the next part of the survey asked about barriers to access. So we're asking people to identify on a map. I'm sure you've all done, I know Plan RV has done MetroQuest maps, mapping surveys, but so you could drop pins on the map where you experience pedestrian, biking, transit, or automobile barriers to access. We also had a pin category where you could just say you were lacking a service or you wanted better access to certain destinations. So from that survey data, we had almost 2,000 responses and several people put in several pins. But we pulled out some themes and barriers to access that you can see on this slide. And I'll say those are reflected heavily also in the new policy language that is in the Path to Equity plan. So you can see a direct linkage between what we heard in the survey and the new policy language that was developed, and that was brought to the advisory committee, who then refined those statements, and you'll see that we ended up with 10 equity factors. We also, with this data, were able to kind of map hotspots, and we anticipate using that along with the mapped data that we got in the Richmond 300 process as a map needs layer in the Richmond Connects effort. So that, that detail level of data, maybe not applicable at the policy level, but I like to know that, we're planning to pull that into the Richmond Connects process and use that in helping to identify our transportation and equity needs. So what's in the document? It's starts with an introduction and purpose. We go into a discussion of what is equity. We have a pretty robust discussion of how we got here, including those injustices that I talked about. And we're really, this document serves as a dual function to also educate and raise awareness of the historical context of housing, land use, redevelopment, and transportation planning and programming that's resulted in the system and the inequities in the system that we have today. And I will say our equity think tank within the city, that was one of our first things that we really talked about is the education piece is a really important component of achieving equity in the city overall. So we feel like this accomplishes that in the transportation arena. The next section, we articulate the planning context from the state, local, and regional level and what barriers there are within each of those levels to achieving equity in transportation. And we also, give some pats on the backs to where people are already incorporating equity, in the Plan RVA process. We say, this is already included in these equity impact areas and kind of give a nod to everybody that and where they're already including it, just to explain the context of where we are. The next main part of the document goes through the new policy, so the equity factors. As I mentioned earlier, we also developed some guiding principles that will need to be followed when we're implementing elements of Richmond Connect's plan. And then we also reiterate the Richmond 300 goals and objectives, like I said, which we'll still be using. And we also reiterate the draft objectives from the RVA Green 2050 policy. And to make those a little bit more simplified, we created these tables, which I have a screenshot later in the slides, but that align them with what we call investment need categories. So those are more like the traditional transportation categories that we would think of. So safety, maintenance, bike and pedestrian, and align that existing policy with those investment need categories. And then we even take it a step further and include a funding crosswalk matrix, if you will, that shows how each of those investment need categories, projects that related to those could be funded through various different funding pots and funding programs. So we're hoping that helps make the alignment when this plan comes out and we have recommendations that also align with the master plan, that we can kind of do this crosswalk and show this is funding pools that would be appropriate for these projects and help it move into implementation a little bit easier. So I just have a quick screenshot. I kind of already went through this, but the first chapter is introduction. Second chapter includes a discussion of the equity agenda, why equity over equality, what is deficit thinking, what is structural racism, white privilege and anti-racism, and a little bit on the COVID-19 pandemic in Richmond. This chapter also has a glossary of terms. Chapter 3 goes through those injustices in more detail with sources. That's also where these little neighborhood call-out boxes start. Just thinking as people flip through the plan, they might be interested in just where they live, so they can look for their neighborhood and read a little bit more about how these injustices impacted where they live. The fourth chapter goes through the context, like I said, of the state, local, and regional planning. We then go on to describe our outreach in more detail and some of the best practices that we've reviewed in equitable outreach. Chapter 6, like I said, is where we have the policy. So we have these guiding principles, these 10 equity factors, and then we reiterate the goals and objectives from the master plan and the RBA green plan and align them with these transportation needs, investment need categories. The last chapter just goes through some of the equity planning research that we did, just in case anybody's interested in this sort of planning, and who we talked to and what we looked at before we started the plan. So you can view the plan online at rva.gov/path to equity. Like Dirana said, that'll be open till the end of the month. I'll put the link in the chat in just a second. But I did include this. If you want to download the PDF, like, you're more than welcome to go on and you can click through the document and add little speech bubbles to put your comments in real time. You can also click that little download button and get the PDF. Feel free to make comments and email them to me. I can put my email in the chat too. If you're short on time and you want to just review the new policy statements, you can also review just the equity factors and just the guiding principles. So as we move forward, we'll finish a public review, finalize a PDF, put that online, and then I'm working on coming up with a layout within our website to make that plan document a little bit more accessible, something more interactive that you can click through. Our next steps, we'll finalize this, and then we're working to kick off the Richmond Connects process right now, and we're hoping to have some of the first outreach in later spring, early summer. And we look forward to continuing our engagement with you guys and having you guys help on our advisory committee. So I appreciate the time today, and this is my contact info, and you can stay tuned. We also have a series of Facebook Live events. One's going tonight at 6 if you follow the city's Facebook page. But I'll put those things in the chat too. I'll leave this up for 1 second. And I'll open it if anybody had questions, or if Dirana wanted to add anything else.
Any questions from the committee? Very powerful brochure. Having grown up in downtown, well, in Richmond, and having taken a recent tour of Scott's Addition and that area, it's very obvious what we did to the community in Richmond. Was very close to folks down at Scott's Addition and all of that area where the highway went through and destroyed a lot of vibrant housing. Fulton and all that area also that were a fabric of the Black community. So agree with a very powerful presentation, and we look forward to continue work with you, Kelly and Bill.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you.
We go now into other business, and the next item is appointment of ad hoc committee and membership committee. We have for quite a while discussed the issue of the dissolution or folding of EDAC, which was for new members, the Elderly and Disabled Advisory Committee. And we were forwarded a memo that Chet did back in 2020, reminding us that this conversation goes back to 2018. The discussion of how we can look at the membership of our committee to better represent our community as a whole. Lisa has agreed to sort of head up this committee to look at appropriate membership of Ctac and whether it would be advisable to add additional groups to our community to better represent specifically the folks from EDAC, but more broadly, the composition of the region as a whole. I think that reading over this memo from Chet, it gives us very much a framework that we can work from in order to achieve that relatively, not going to say easily, but relatively quickly. So I'd like to ask for volunteers to join Lisa in that committee. It is something that Lisa and I had talked about as we looked at goals for my and her administration, and something that we'd like to get done by summer. So do I have any volunteers that would join Lisa in the ad hoc membership committee? Well, you can look forward to my reaching out to you and asking for your membership. John, yeah, you're one on my hit list. So yes, Lisa.
Thank you, Upton. We had discussed some possible organizations that could send some representatives to meet with us to generate ideas about who we might reach out to. So if anybody, in addition to volunteering themselves to serve on this this work group, has any recommendations for people we should reach out to or organizations, that would be welcome as well.
All right, thank you. If you are willing to join Lisa, we don't think that this is going to be a complex issue. Like I say, we've got the framework set up by work that previous folks have done and that Chet has done. Ken is going to provide the staff support. We may or may not have to go to RRTPO, the bylaws, because it says that we can have up to 12 at-large groups be a part of the committee. So I just don't think that we're going to go beyond that. But I will be, if you want to volunteer, let Lisa and myself know. Otherwise, I will go ahead and make some phone calls, get some emails out there. We don't think that we're going to need more than maybe 4 people on that committee. So look forward to my contacting you. John, are you willing? John Leonard, are you willing to help out? Okay, so we got 2. Anybody else raise their thumbs up? Of course, I can't see half of you. Okay, I'll be reaching out to you. Thank you very much. The next topic is future meeting topics. That was on page 10. Scheduled for March is going to be Virginia Transit Equity and Modernization Study, along with the equity issues, as well as Regional Trails Bike and Pedestrian Plan Update. And then in May, we're looking at our workshop focused on transportation funding. Bob Powers, that may be part of that, the question that you had in regards to funding for transportation. Any Seatac member comments?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Chad.
Not a Ctec member, but I would like to raise that for the May meeting, we may have to scramble because I'm not sure how much information we'll have on federal actions at that point. We're still trying to understand what the impacts of the Infrastructure Act is on. We know we've seen data for the overall state of Virginia, but we don't have anything more granular that would give us numbers for Richmond or the region in general. We hope to have that soon, but at this point, there's still so much work that's being done in committee, and Congress still has decisions to make on what that means. So I like the funding focus, but the actual topics may need to fluctuate depending on what's available.
All right. Thank you, Chad. I think one of the, yes, Lisa.
A point to make about our March 17th, we had a briefing by DRPT last meeting in November about the Transit Equity and Modernization Study. they won't complete their study until summer. And so, so that might need to rotate to a later date as well.
Good point. Thank you, Lisa. Other comments? Okay, next meeting is going to be March the 17th. My assumption is it will also be virtual. I personally like meetings in person, but I tell you, it's relatively convenient for all of us to go on. We don't have to travel. I'm sitting here with my work blue jeans and slippers on, and I don't think I could get away with that at the office. So there are some advantages, but the personal contact to me is very much of a disadvantage. I love getting together with you guys. Any other comments? Then I'll adjourn the meeting and look forward to seeing you all March the 19th. And look forward to my emails to populate our committee. Take care, everybody.
Stay safe.
Thank you, Upton.
Don Root, see you tonight.
Did you, I kind of missed, were you asking for calls for somebody to appointments for that Hanover County Council on Aging?
No.
No,
Okay.
I put that link out there just because Ms. Guthrie had asked for suggestions of agencies or individuals to reach out to. I personally know some people at the Hanover Council on Aging, and when I looked that up, I also went on and looked up Henrico's and Chesterfield's, just some ideas.
Cool. I was just gonna say, you can ask my parents. They're seniors that live in Hanover County that need stuff to do.
Mine too.
My project, but I was like, maybe.
Send me a link to their name because I live in Ashland and I'm sure we can get them busy. And I'm
yeah.
not looking for more to do.
Yeah. My dad is Jimmy Nash and my mom is Sandra Nash. I'll send you my dad's email.
Hey, where do they live?
I don't know if you really want him. They live now over by South Anna Elementary.
Okay.
They used to live, and I spent my high school years in Beaver Dam, so I'm a Patrick Henry graduate.
Good for you. Both of my children are also.
Yeah. You were talking about Ashland, and I was getting nostalgic. I was gonna say, if you ever went to the Ashland variety shows, I, as like a middle schooler in high school, what high schooler was in this? And that part of our little song, and it's like, what is it? The best people live on the side of the tracks, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's so cute. I love Ashland.
On the side of the tracks from where I live.
Yeah, oh, okay. They're talking about the other side of the tracks, not Upton's side of the tracks.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, take care.
Well, the powerful stuff that you folks are doing and needs to be disseminated to everybody. Thank you.
We think so. Thank you. Thanks for having us. Take
Thank you,
care.
Kelly.
Stay warm.
Appreciate your presentation today.
Yeah, thanks, Ken.
See you, Ken.
Take care, Upton.
I'll be in contact with you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's not a warning. Y'all take care. Have a good day.
Okay,
You
you
too.
too.
Talk to you later.
Right. Bye.